Control is one of those games that is very easy to admire, very easy to enjoy, and a little harder to fully explain with just a simple review score. Because on one hand, I think this game is very good. I had a good time with it. I think the developers Remedy made one of the most interesting settings in recent times, and the oldest house where things take place is weird in exactly the right way. The mood is strong, the atmosphere is strong, the world building is strong, and when Control here is firing on all cylinders, it feels like you are playing your way through a secret government nightmare, and it just plays out beautifully. The longer I played, the more one thing became clear to me. The world of Control is deeper than the game systems underneath it, and that gap matters. Hi, I'm Vadd. In this review, we're going to dive into everything here in Control for the Ultimate Edition. I specifically played on PC, start to finish, the DLC, the side stuff, so we're going to cover all of that in today's review. And here for me, the big question is Control a great game because of what you do in it? Or is it a great game because of the world you move through while doing it? Because for me, I think that answer is a little uncomfortable because it leans towards the second one. At a glance, Control is a third-person action-adventure game with this strong paranormal mystery wrapped around it. We'll be playing as Jessie Faden, who arrives at the Federal Bureau of Control looking for her brother Dylan after some supernatural events during her childhood changed her life and her brother's life forever. Within the opening minutes of the game, Jessie ends up becoming the new director of the Bureau, and all of a sudden, our personal search gets tied into this much bigger crisis the Bureau of Control is going through. Overall, the play loop is pretty simple. You're going to move through different sectors of the Bureau of Control. You're going to fight through the enemies that are assailing things. You're going to unlock new abilities, clear story objectives, and slowly gain access to more of the building as your powers expand. There's a little fun element here where the new abilities you get do not just help you in combat, they also will open up new paths, let you reach hidden places, and kind of give you a reason to maybe revisit old areas. On some level, I think that structure by itself tells you what Control wants to be. I think it wants to be a stylish action game. I think it wants to be a paranormal mystery. And it's actually kind of an exploration-heavy journey through a location that's frankly a little unforgettable. I think that part, at least, it nails. When I look back at my script here, I think to myself, what's the most important part of this review? And I think it's the part here right now where I talk about what the game promises versus what it actually delivers. Because Control promises, or at least what it can seem to promise in those early hours, it promises this deep, supernatural action game where your powers, your weapons, your upgrades, your mods, your approach to combat, they're all going to keep evolving in meaningful ways for a long time. It gives you easy to understand skill trees, it gives you fun weapons to play around with, it gives you personal mods to change your playstyle, it gives you weapon mods to further boost your direction one way or another, it gives you different powers with different uses, and all of a sudden you have this world full of secrets, side missions, these altered items, optional bosses, lore, and of course naturally, as a player here in the early game, you start building a picture in your head of what this game might become as you journey further through it. It starts to feel like it's this really flexible action game where you can genuinely build your main character Jessie in very different ways. You start to have this feeling of maybe it's going to be a long-term combat sandbox. Maybe in the later hours, the system's really going to open up. And I think the truth is that's not really what Control is. Control is delivering a tighter, more directed, more streamlined game. I'm not saying it's shallow, I'm saying there's plenty here to stay interested in, but a lot of the depth is front-loaded as possibility rather than paid off as true long-term variety. I think early on it looks like you're shaping a build, but later on you'll look back and realize you're mostly just deciding what order to unlock things in, and you kind of drift towards a pretty similar end state from where you started. On some level, we have this very unique service weapon and our powers around it, and it feels like it creates this wide range of playstyles. But I think later on, you look back and it becomes clear that combat is more about learning the few tools that work best and repeating the rhythm. And I don't think that makes the game bad. I think it means that Control is better read as an atmosphere-first action game than as a deep systems action game. And once I started to recognize and look at things through that lens, the whole experience for Control makes more sense. The facts are the first few hours of Control are excellent. Not because everything's mechanically perfect, but because Control here understands how to create curiosity. You enter this very, very plain, vanilla, boring, 90-degree corners, just this most mundane government building, and you're just looking for answers. And as you move forward, trying to find your brother, the building starts to reveal itself. You find the body of the previous director. You pick up the service weapon. You get pulled into the astral plane. You start meeting the board. You start learning about the enemy that's invading. You meet other characters that talk about things like it's a normal office. And the Control game here just keeps stacking one bizarre idea on top of another. And it is a fantastic opening because the entire way it's going to make you and me and everyone playing through ask questions constantly. I don't mean that in an overwhelming sense or an exhausting sense. They're just natural curiosity moments. What is this place? What happened here? Who can I trust? Where's my brother? I think these early moments carry the game. They create this early momentum, and I mean that in the best possible way. It's one of those openings where Discovery does a lot of the heavy lifting. Incredibly, I think the mid-game is really where Control is strongest overall. By then, you have a fuller set of your abilities, you understand the tone, you're more comfortable moving around through the environment, and you've started to meet some of the other characters. The cast starts to settle in, more side content starts to open up, and all of a sudden, Control no longer is there trying to convince you it's a weird game. It's just being weird. And you have this moment where you're like, wow, like this is the game at its best. I think the problems show up more so later on, because I don't think the further you go, I don't think it keeps growing in equally strong ways. Yes, there's still a sense of mystery. Yes, the world building is still existing, but the combat stops changing as much as I wanted it to. Enemy encounters started to feel more familiar, and there's this sense that you're making these major decisions that are starting to weaken. Yes, the main story has a very strong setup, but I don't think it quite lands with the same force, especially that middle stretch really builds toward and delivers on. I'm not saying the game collapses later on, I think that's far too harsh, but I'm definitely here to say that the early and middle hours promise a level of growth and payoff that the final stretch does not fully deliver. I want to be very clear here. The reason Control works at all is that the moment-to-moment action is fun. I think Remedy here got the basics right. Your telekinetic powers are fun. You're pulling chunks of concrete, office furniture, and whatever else is around you. You're firing it back at enemies. It feels fast. It feels violent. It feels satisfying, and it never stops being cool. It's a move that makes you sold on the fantasy. It's the type of move that makes you feel like Jessie is not just carrying a gun with superpowers, she is a dangerous supernatural force. Control's combat is all about movement and pressure. You're not really supposed to sit down, hunker, get some cover. You're meant to play this more like a dash, reposition, throw objects. You swap your weapon around, you shield when you need it, you float around later on. You just try and keep the fight flowing. There's a flow to combat, and the service weapon here helps a lot. It's one weapon, but it has different forms, and it's really clever the way it feels so smooth and flawless. You're going to be switching your weapon through fights, as you might want something that has a little more punch up close or a little more range further on. Now you might be saying to me, Vadd, you're telling me there's cool combat with fun abilities, a cool weapon, what's the issue? Well, the issue is it peaks too early. Once you understand the rhythm, once you know which powers you like, and you get comfortable starting to read the enemy behavior, the fights stop evolving at the same rate that everything else does. You're still going to get enjoyable encounters, you're still getting strong visuals and chaos, you're still getting the pleasure of tearing pieces out of the environment and just launching the office into a war zone and a little bit of a physics bonanza, but the underlying decisions you're making become you start to immediately just go, the enemy needs this answer. Okay, I've got an enemy with a shield, let me do that. Okay, I'm going to target the flyer. Okay, this group I can try and control and launch around and clean up with some fire. This pattern recognition is not a flaw by itself. I think a lot of action games work this way. For me here, the problem is that Control spends a lot of time dressing itself in language of deeper customization. So when the combat plateaus, you just really feel it. Overall, I think the enemy variety also contributes to that feeling. Let's be clear here. You're not fighting a useless enemy. They're going to create pressure, they rush you, they fire from a distance, they float around, they can try and mirror your powers, they have armor, they have different weapons. But overall, it's not enough to keep every late game encounter feeling fresh, especially in a title where we're going to be spending so much time in combat spaces and revisiting parts of the game. At its best, Control sends you into new parts of the oldest house. That's the location where all the levels are mostly based in. It has a very strong visual identity, it has good new problems to solve, and it has enough environmental storytelling to make the trip always feel worthwhile even before a fight starts. I think this is a huge strength. I think the Control game here understands the place. It understands how to make one sector of the building feel very different from another. Even still, they keep the whole building built from this same level of bureaucratic concrete language. There's a purity of purpose in this building. From a strictly level design standpoint, the structure is really direct. You go here, you fight this, you restore a location, you unlock a new path. You talk to a person, you push a little deeper, you repeat. And I don't think this is a problem because most of the time the setting does so much to support. But I think it's important here that we need to not oversell Control as some hugely reactive gameplay machine. It's not. This is a guided action adventure with enough freedom to explore and enough upgrades to create momentum. That's what it is. I think judging it on those terms, when we understand that, I think it works. It's time to get a little more critical though. Let's face it. Control's progression is the part that most clearly suggests something bigger than the game actually delivers. You have skill trees tied to your powers and core stats, you have weapon forms, weapon mods, personal mods, you gather material, you unlock upgrades, and on paper, it kind of sounds like a lot. But in the early game, it does start to create this feeling that you're shaping Jesse, your character, into a very specific kind of hero. And at first, it works. Early decisions do change, and the choices you power up make you feel much stronger in that direction. Maybe you went harder on your weapon, maybe you went harder on your early telekinesis powers. It's only later on that the problems show up, because the more you look at these systems, the more you realize it's offering short-term preferences more than long-term identity. Control gives you the impression of a build, but it doesn't really make you commit to builds. The skill tree does not lock you into a dramatically different role. Your service weapon does not have a deep enough progression path to carry its own side of the system by itself. And by the end, I think a lot of players are going to end up converging towards a very, very similar build overall of your character. For me, that's a little disappointing, not because every game needs extreme build freedom, but because Control clearly wants you to think about progression in the language of the world it's building. And on some level, once that illusion breaks, the rewards it wants you to chase are immediately weaker. Why are you bothering to chase upgrade materials? Why do you care about these upgrades? Why treat the different weapon forms like a majority, a big identity choice? Ultimately, by the end of the game, I think most players are going to shoot almost the same gun, the same way, with the same powers, at the same enemies. It's going to be very, very homogenized. Because long term, the motivation and Control really comes from curiosity, not from progression. You're going to keep playing because you want to see the next strange zone. You're going to keep playing because you want to read that next document and understand some more of the lore, or something funny pops up. You're going to keep playing because you're going to find another altered item, another side quest, another weird room, another optional boss, another bit of the history of things, and all this side stuff and optional combat and the boss fights. I think they're really important here because together, this surrounding material matters. I think it keeps the Control game feeling broader than the main story alone allows. And oftentimes there's a spike in challenge or difficulty or just visual imagination that I think some parts of the main path start to lose. Overall, I think there's a long-term motivation to keep moving through the game, but I don't think the strongest push from that motivation comes from the loot, your build, the mods, or the idea of the build you're trying to craft, because it's really going to be coming from a wanting to spend more time inside this world. Let's be clear here. I think Control has earned some reputation in its world building, and I think it deserves all of that. No, I don't think it's excellent and that every answer is perfect or that every story beat lands, but I think the world building is excellent in the sense that Remedy here has created a setting with a real identity. The Federal Bureau of Control, the old house, the building you're in, it feels like a workplace. It feels like a research site. It feels like a containment zone, a myth machine, and I don't think that's easy to pull off. I think this location, the oldest house where you spend most of your time, is a great setting. On some level, it feels oppressive, but also feels very plain. It feels impossible, but also unknowable. It feels boring in the most intentional way imaginable. And somehow, all these things together make the supernatural elements stand out even harder. There's a shifting nature to the building that gives the Control game just an endless excuse to surprise you. And I think the art direction here makes even the most boring of concrete hallways have a bit of loaded tension. I think it's worth noting there's a supporting cast of characters you meet along the way. Each of them makes sense. They're all kind of weird, but they're weird in the ways that fit the rules of the place you find them or the roles you find them in. Control is just full of people who feel like they belong in this absurd institution. Let's be clear here, I'm not saying this is random weirdness. It feels authored. The documents, the audio logs, the reports, the training material, all these collectibles, they add on. They do a lot of the heavy lifting here. Because in Control, a lot of this writing is genuinely worth your time. I think it fills out the Bureau of Control. It adds a layer of humor. It gives some context to what you're doing. And oftentimes, these little notes, just these one-page little memorandums, it makes the world feel so much bigger than whatever room you're standing in. We can't really talk about world building without talking about the main character themselves. Here, that is Jessie. And this is a little more complicated. I think as a character, they have a strong presence, and I think her basic motivations work. I think the simple fact of I'm searching for my brother, it gives a necessary personal thread, so it doesn't just feel like a basic paranormal office tourism kind of event, right? I think the game is sometimes trusting its setting more than it's trusting Jessie. I think there are moments where Jessie just feels a little too direct, a little too spelled out. Like the script is afraid to let the performance or situation carry the feelings. Because ultimately, Jessie's personal story, as time progresses, feels so much smaller than the world around it. Yes, we want to find our brother Dylan. Yes, we care about, our friend Polaris, but we care so much more eventually by the end about what happened to our hometown of Ordinary. We're so much more invested in the Bureau itself, the people we meet there, the enemies we face, the altered items we find. There's this whole structure of reality, and all that became more compelling to me than Jessie's personal emotional arc. And I think ultimately that's an okay direction to go if the ending fully brings all these threads together, and it does not. Not for me, it might for you, it didn't for me. I want to be clear here, I'm not saying the final stretch is terrible, but it does feel rushed compared to how strong the early and mid game is. Some of the most interesting ideas feel like they are either compressed too quickly or pushed into surrounding materials instead of landing cleanly in the main path. Ultimately, when I look back at how Control ended and how it made me feel, I think the ending was interesting, but it wasn't fully satisfying. On some level, I came away impressed by the setting, impressed by the tone, impressed by the world building, but only somewhat satisfied by the main personal payoff. Jessie trying to find her brother just wasn't quite there by the end. Ultimately, I think Control's biggest strength is it's not generic. The setting is so specific, the tone is so specific, the language used in the world is specific, the art direction is specific, and when you are doing something mechanically familiar, the world around you is really making it feel different. I think the combat is fun. I think there's a good mix of a fantasy element here, the destruction, the speed, the impact, the movement. I think it all works out nicely, and overall, I think all the optional side stuff and the expansions are pretty valuable. I think these side missions, some of the more weird encounters in these boss fights, all give the game more life. And sometimes even the side stuff, it delivers on ideas better than the main campaign does. So you might be sitting here going, Vadd, you sound so critical of Control. Hey, listen, I want to be clear about something. There's a reason that people remember this game after the fact, and it earns that. Still, the biggest weakness in Control here is that it hints at more mechanical depth than it has, and I think that's actually a central flaw here. Not because the combat is bad, not because the powers you unlock are boring, not because the systems are empty, but because the game teaches you to expect a kind of long-term growth that does not arrive. I think that's compounded because a second weakness here is that the enemies and encounters get repetitive faster than I want them to. You get stronger tools, you get more confidence, but the Control game here does not keep matching your capabilities and excitement with equally fresh combat demands. And overall, I think the third biggest weakness, if we were just to name three, would be the ending. I don't think it ruins the story, but I do think that last stretch of the main campaign is much smaller than all the build-up to it deserves. For a game built so heavily on mystery and escalation, I think this matters. On some level, once you realize the Control game is not really about making a sharply different Jessie from player to player, some of the RPG-like framing starts to feel more decorative than essential. I don't think Control needs to be something else entirely. I don't think it needs to stop being story-driven. I do not think it needs to become a giant open-ended sandbox, but I do wish it had committed harder to the ideas it introduced earlier on. I would have loved to have seen the enemy variety keep climbing deeper as we went through the game. And I wanted the progression choices to stay more meaningful for longer. I wanted a more clear long-term identity tied to our service weapon or the personal build choices we made. And ultimately, I really wish the best versions of the game had a finale that hit just as hard as the early game and the middle game does. Ultimately, I think Control is close. I can imagine a version of this game that becomes one of the truly great action-adventure games of all time. And the reason I can see that version so clearly is because the world, the atmosphere, and the tone are doing so much of the work. There's this obvious ceiling here, and the game just lands just a little below it. I think when we talk about value for money, this is where we need to note that personal enjoyment and buyer advice here is going to be split. I enjoyed Control. I'm glad I played it. I think for the right player, it is absolutely worth owning. But I'm not here to pitch this as some value monster built on endless replayability or huge gameplay flexibility. You're really paying for here a memorable setting, strong atmosphere, a solid core to combat, some excellent side content, and a world that's going to stick around with you even after credits have rolled. You're not here getting into a deep RPG layering system. There's no huge build diversity. It's a combat system that's not going to keep reinventing itself dozens of hours in. So if you're here buying it for the mood, the world building, the supernatural action, I think there's a really strong value here. But I want to lower expectations that if you're seeing at a glance the menus and upgrade system makes you feel like there might be a deeper, long-term mechanical game, it's not here. As a full package, I think the Control Ultimate Edition game here is the right way to go because it makes things feel more complete. Because Control is for players who care a lot about atmosphere, and the Ultimate Edition has all the expansions and side stuff inside of it, and that's important for that atmosphere. If you're the type of player who likes wandering through strange worlds and piecing together the lore, this is absolutely the game for you. But if you're the type of player who wants deep buildcraft, this is not for you. If you're the type of player who enjoys reading documents, listening to logs, and following a weird breadcrumb trail, the type of player who enjoys a little bit of stylish third-person action without needing hyper-complex inputs, this is a great game. But if you're the type of gamer who's expecting combat evolutions all the way through, or you need to have every story payoff landing cleanly, you're going to be a little disappointed. If you're the type of player who can forgive some repetition if the setting and mood are strong enough, you're going to be fine. But if you're the type of player who bounces off collectible-driven world building and you just want to mainline the main path and let the narrative do all the heavy lifting, this is going to be tough. Ultimately, is Control worth playing? I think yes, I think it is. Is it worth buying? Again, yes, for the right person. But the reasons I'm recommending are very specific. Again, I'm not recommending Control because it's this endlessly expanding action system where every upgrade changes things. I'm recommending it because the developers here built one of the most memorable settings in recent games. They wrapped it around a genuinely fun, telekinetic combat foundation that's filled with a very strong set of world building. The exploration continues to feel worthwhile, even when the underlying systems stop growing as much as I hoped they would. And this goes back to what we opened with. Kind of the key here, the underlying tone below my whole review is that Control is better as a place than it is as a system. Frankly, I think a lot of video games would just absolutely do anything to be half as memorable as Control is. I think what holds it back from being an all-time favorite from a broad spectrum of players is that progression flattens out, the combat depth plateaus, and the ending does not fully capitalize on how much intrigue the game builds. This leaves me, personally, coming away from Control feeling impressed, entertained, but still unsatisfied. If I were just to simply score this game on originality and atmosphere, and the feeling of exploring a bizarre secret institution, I'd have both hands in the air shouting absolute cinema. But if I'm scoring the whole package, which is what we do here, which includes things like progression and how the story lands, it's got to lower its score. Ultimately, Control is not a perfect game, but what it does well, it does in a way that is hard to forget. At the time of review, Control is awarded a 4 out of 5. I recommend. Its world, its atmosphere, and the action combat are memorable enough to carry the experience, even though its progression and combat depth never become as rich as they first appear. How about you? If you finished Control, I'm curious what mattered more to you by the end. Did you care more about the oldest house or Jesse? Did you care more about the game systems or the side content? Let's talk about everything Control in the comments. See you there. Thanks for watching.